who took part in the project, who's going to give a short presentation on the impact that project's had in her school. And then we have our live panel Q&A. So if you are online, please do post questions into the chat. We have a moderator here who's going to be calling those out. And then we'll be ending round about 5:30. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jean Gross, CBE, teacher, educational psychologist, consultant, and author of many, many books on social emotional learning and the EEF Social Emotional Learning Guidance Report. So over to you, Jean.
Thank you very much. And hello to all of you here. I don't think you've ever been in a room with so many authors before. No, this is like Waterstones or a literary festival. And I'm here to introduce a book that I call it a book written by teachers for teachers. And it is down to the hard work of the teachers in this room that the book has been published. The book came about because a group of teachers in various parts of London, but particularly around here, wanted to tackle issues of behaviour and well-being in their classrooms. And they all chose what they wanted to focus on. So for some of them, it might be a group of children, for some a class, or for some individuals. A lot of their choice was within the school was steered by the after effects of COVID, and particular year groups or classes that had had particular impact from COVID lockdowns. And so we're going to talk about their work in just a second, Sarah and I. But first of all, I want to know, oops, I've done the wrong thing, Sarah, can I get it back? I knew I would. I pressed the wrong one. Thank you. That's it. Thank you so much. I want to know how you're feeling. So look at this famous blob tree. And which of those blobs are you feeling like today? You don't have to say, just have a think. I do hope that you're not feeling like the one on the floor, but you might well be. I hope you're feeling a little more perky. Now, if we didn't have lots and lots of people online, and if we had more time, what we would now do, you having chosen your blob, would be for you to turn to the person next to you and talk about why you'd chosen that one, without going into details of your whole life history and your divorce and so on, but simply a quick chat about that. And I think you might have felt better afterwards if you weren't feeling great, or even better if you were feeling good. So what you would have done there is a check-in, an emotional check-in, and we're going to talk more about that kind of check-in later. My role in this piece of work was at the beginning to share some ideas about behaviour and wellbeing and social emotional learning from which the teachers could choose and cherry pick what meant something to them. And one of the things I shared was a model about behaviour. And the model, I think, is one way of reconciling that group of people who say all behaviour is due to deep-seated emotional issues and must be responded to as that, and the group who say no excuses, every child must be treated the same, silent corridors, and let's punish. And I've tried to reconcile those two views by saying there are different reasons why children might not behave well. So there's a group at the top who actually can behave, but choose not to. And they choose not to because actually perhaps it's more fun to misbehave, to make your friends laugh, or if you misbehave you might get sent out of a lesson and not have to do that piece of writing or whatever. But the reasons for, we haven't managed to persuade them to behave with stronger rewards for behaving than misbehaving. Now that group of children actually can respond perfectly well to straightforward rewards and sanctions and a straightforward behaviour policy, and they often will respond quite quickly to that. Then there's another group that I've called can't, don't know how to. And these are children who actually don't respond well to a normal school behaviour policy because they don't have the underpinning skills they need. They don't necessarily know how to handle frustration, manage their feelings, cope with difficulties, get on with other people, make friendships. They lack some sort of core skills. And for them, we have to think, well, what's the role of schools in actively developing those skills? The right hand says can, behave but temporarily lose it when life gets too much. And these are children who have underpinning skills, social emotional skills, but then life gets in the way, they're stressed, their granny dies, things happen, and they just may lose it for a few days or even longer. And those children need our schools that provide a listening ear and emotional check-ins like the one we just did, someone to talk to and ways to learn how to calm themselves, how to regulate their feelings. The group who I've called can't because of attachment issues or trauma, those are the children who challenge our behaviour systems most. They are children who lose it, but lose it more intensely and for longer than the group who temporarily lose it. Their nervous systems are permanently on high alert. They often have had difficulties in their early lives, they've had attachment difficulties or trauma of one kind or another. And for them, we need safe places, safe spaces. We have to have a whole school environment that supports them, but often they may need external help as well. So one of the things we did when talking about this project with the teachers here is say, well, you're going to choose a group to try and make a difference to and do a piece of research, which Sarah will explain, to see if you can make a difference. And we suggested that actually they don't choose these children who pose the greatest challenges because in a couple of terms or even a year, it would be difficult to make that visible, measurable difference. Nevertheless, many of them did include those children in the work. Many of them did choose those children, and the results were often, not always, but often really, really fantastic. So I was wrong in suggesting don't go there. Most of the teachers chose to focus on this group. And then the can't, because they don't have the underpinning skills. And then it became a matter of how do we actually teach those? I love this quote. When children don't know how to read, we teach. When children don't know how to write, we teach. But if a child doesn't know how to behave, what do? It doesn't spring to the lips straight away that we teach. It's a harder sentence to finish than the others. And we think we teach behaviour. I think we teach rules, we teach routines, and we teach our values. But we don't always teach the underpinning skills that enables children to follow our rules and to obey the routines and to adhere to our values. So there is, I think, a huge teaching job there, and that is what the teachers in this room have been so successful in achieving. They were introduced to a model of what these skills are, the 5 areas we call social emotional learning, and many of them look particularly at self-awareness and self-management, how we help children to learn to recognise how they're feeling and then manage their emotions. Others of the teachers looked at relationship skills and empathy and conflict resolution. So there was a whole range. What did the teachers do? Well, this is what is in the book. Most of the chapters are written by the teachers, and I've just put a few things there that they did. They taught children how their brains work. Wonderful. Why isn't that part of the national curriculum? They taught children how to use a broader range of emotion words, how to identify and describe their feelings. They introduced environmental changes like calm down zones and Zen zones where children could learn to regulate their feelings. They tackled playground problems brilliantly, and they had older children coaching younger children, and that's only a part of what they did. We wanted, as well as the chapters written by the teachers, we wanted to make the book really practical, so there are lots of resources in the book, practical resources. This one, for example, is from Cubit Town, which is an oracy school where they believe in helping children learn to express themselves through speaking and listening. And they devised steps and prompts, things children could say when they were in conflict, to help them understand each other's point of view and come to a resolution. So we've put a blank template in there in the hope that other schools might use or devise their own peace path, their own prompts. In the book, there are 20 exercises to help children stay calm. everything from hot chocolate breathing to bubble breathing to belly buddies. I'll leave you to find out what those are. There are a lot of different check-ins, different ways that we can help children say how they're feeling and show how they're feeling when they come into our classrooms, because I think we need a bit of variety in this and not always doing the same at any one point. There is a progression in teaching words for feelings, right from reception up to year 6. You know, sometimes I go into year 6 and they're still learning about happy, sad, scared, and we need to think, how do we develop that? How do we have a progression? There are a list of top picture books for teaching about emotions and some guidance on how to use those wonderful picture books to teach children. Most of all in the book, what you'll find most usefully, I think, is some of the actual PowerPoint slides and lessons that the teachers devised and used, and they're all going to be downloadable from the publisher's website so other people can take them, use them and adapt them. So I hope the world is going to find this a really useful book. I think it will make a difference to the way children's behaviour is managed in classrooms. So thank you to all the teachers who've made that happen.
Thank you, Jean. Just a little brief overview of how the project worked. So this is a kind of tried and tested research methodology based on something called research learning communities, which you can find out about on the EEF website, developed by UCL Institute of Education. So it's a research project where 2 carefully chosen participants take part, and it's really important that one of them is a teacher, because the teacher can test things out in the classroom, can tell their colleagues that it works, it made a difference, it didn't cause a huge amount of workload, and a senior leader who can enable that learning to be disseminated to other colleagues, who can affect policy, who can allocate CPD time, so that can be spread across the school. We had some great input from Jean Gross, as she already mentioned. We also had some great input from Dr. John Ivens, former head teacher of Bethlem and Maudesly Hospital School, and a psychologist who's on the panel today. And really, this was a project about developing social and emotional wellbeing strategies, but also it gave those teachers some research skills that they can use for other research projects in their own context when they're trying to explore and tackle really tricky to solve problems in their own schools. Who benefited? Obviously, we really wanted it to make a difference to those target pupils that Jean mentioned a moment ago. That was the focus of the project. We gathered data to check, did it make a difference to those focus pupils? But what we really wanted and what we really believed would happen would be that these strategies would be of benefit to lots and lots of different children in the school. So that was really important, that it was about a small group of people, but these were strategies we felt would make a difference to everybody. And it was offering professional development for both the teacher and the leader, so running inquiry projects, 5 face-to-face sessions, teaching them how to run and write up their own inquiry project, and those write-ups would eventually turn into the chapters in the book. So this is the research cycle that we use. So starting off by identifying a research question or an inquiry focus and deciding what is the difference that we want to make to those pupils. Then we gathered some baseline data, and I'll talk to you a little about that in a minute, and we had the lovely Jean Gross giving us some ideas of what is already known. What do we already know? What could we draw on to design our change to practice? Teachers then went and designed a change to practice in their own schools, tested it, refined it, tweaked it, gathered some impact data and shared that with each other. So there was lots of cross-learning across the different schools on the projects, and that was a really important part of the project. So we started out by looking at what difference they wanted to make. So really trying to pin down what we wanted that change to look like. What do we want it to look like for the children? What do we want to look like for the staff? What do we want to look like for the parents? We then used a really nice strategy for people who are running research projects in schools, and I've also done this with academics at the Institute of Education, using post-it notes, which sounds very odd, but it's a way to generate a really strong research question collaboratively. So you throw out lots and lots of crazy ideas and you refine that down to a single research question. The teachers found that really helpful because writing a research question is actually really tricky. Then, thanks to John Ivens, we did this lovely happiness line, which is a really nice, simple tool. It's very difficult, John taught us, to measure the well-being of pupils aged 7 or below through a survey, because they can only remember what happened to them in the last 30 minutes, and that will cloud their judgment. So the happiness line is a way to map when have they been at their happiest, when have they been at their least happy, and how is it now, and then to talk to them about what are the strategies that we could use to close that gap and make them feel happier. So this was a really nice tool. Lots of teachers used this. For older pupils, they also used a really nice online survey designed by John Ivens, which was really helpful and gave them some kind of personalised feedback on the issues that those particular focus children were facing in their own schools. They also used the Leuven scale. For those of you who haven't heard of that, it's a really nice way to get a number score for an observation of a child's involvement or engagement and well-being. So you can do this through a short classroom observation. Those we used at the beginning and the end of the project. They're really useful for the research project because they can give you a before and after number, but they're also really helpful just to spend time observing a child and really thinking about what is going on for that child in that situation. We then did something a little bit crazy, but everybody loved it. So this is a really, really nice way to model a situation and to think about how you want it to change and to think about all the different aspects that are involved in that situation. So it involves using 3D modelling equipment. So we had all kinds of bizarre stuff, as you can see here. We had Lego, we had paper, we had pipe cleaners, we had pens, we had all different kinds of equipment. And the teachers were asked to model the challenge that those children are facing, all of the different things that affect that, and then to look at if that's what the current situation is, how can we change that? It's not pulled out of thin air, it is a research tool, and teachers always kind of give you a strange look when you ask them to do this, but at the end of this activity, they really feel it has helped them to understand the situation. So they took their baseline data, their model making activity, their research question, and the research that Jean had shared with them, and they designed a change to practice and began to implement it in their schools. We did quite a lot of work around what's called knowledge mobilisation, so sharing what they were doing with other colleagues so that those other colleagues would want to join in those projects. So we had them making posters to showcase the project and sharing with other colleagues, what are we doing, why are we doing it, what's working. We also did quite a lot of work about how they might influence other people in their schools. So for those of you who don't know social network analysis, this is a kind of hierarchical model of how influence flows through a school. But over here, we know that actually information flows in a much more organic way. It's about who's friends with who goes down the pub with who, whose classroom is next door to who. So we did a bit of mapping of colleagues inside school to decide who would be the good people to influence, to make my change to practice become really embedded. Then we looked at levels of impact. So we looked at Gusky. We supported the teachers to think about writing about all the different levels of impact. So Gusky says, obviously, initial reactions are really important, but then it's what have people learned? What has changed inside the organisation? How have you used the new knowledge and skills? And what difference does it make to pupils? And Gusky says all those layers are really, really important when you're presenting on the impact of a project. So they wrote some lovely case studies, and those became the chapters in the book. And just finally, a few quotes. I won't read them out from participants, but there is a full report which shares all the data with you, and they really did make a difference to those pupils they were teaching, but also to other pupils inside their schools. Many of the projects went whole school after they were small group. And they really felt that they learned themselves. They learned a lot about SEMH and how to support those children in the classroom, but they also learned about other aspects and other strategies to doing projects like this in the future. Okay, so that's me done. I'm going to hand over now to Emily, who is from Pinnerwood, who's one of the authors of the book, and she's going to talk to you about her research project.
Lovely. Hello everybody. So I took over this project with Sarah, and we were looking at how, if we teach self-regulation, will it improve the children's behaviour? So just to give you a little bit of context, very brief context about the children we were working with, we had a very high level of children with SEN, specifically SEMH needs in the cohort, and we had a lot of boys. I think we had, it was 70% boys in the year group, in the year 5 class. So this project was perfect for us. So what we did, after we'd come up with, we followed the process that Sarah just said, we had our question, we got to the teaching, and we decided that we would do the zones of regulation as our kind of centre, as our hub for all the work that we'd done. So we taught lessons explicitly. We realised very early on that the children needed to firstly be able to name their emotions, be able to realise what it feels like in your body when you're feeling in the yellow zone, when you're feeling anxious, what does that feel like? And then, most importantly, I would say what you're going to do about it, like to help yourself, because these are strategies that we're giving to the children for life. So we had lessons, specific lessons of what would it look, how do you feel, what would it look like in your body, and how can you get back to green? So what are your strategies that you can actually do right now? Be that breathing, be that go to the calm zone, talk to a friend, etc. So as well as that, we had, here's a display, it's one of my displays, of the zones of regulation, and the children were able to move their names around the zones. At first, it was whenever they wanted. But as you can probably imagine, that was chaos. And they were up and about all the time. We were like, oh, this is hijacking the lessons completely. We need to bring it back. So we observed when we felt the children were most heightened, and then we planned that in. So we had a check-in straight away in the morning when they'd just come from home as part of a soft start settling activity. We had after break, after lunch, when they'd been outside, they'd run around. We realised this was going to be a time we needed to just regulate, bring ourselves back to the green zone if possible, or if not possible, to be able to manage the learning that was going to continue. So that was another strategy. And then following that, we continue to innovate the project. So another thing we brought in was the Monday morning meetings. So this is 15 minutes on a Monday where we sat in a circle, usually, and we would talk through the zones, where the children were feeling, what strategies they were using, why they might have felt that way. This was a really good opportunity just to regroup. And what we actually did, we innovated again, and we paired it with a Friday roundup. So it was a Friday feedback session where you talk about the whole week, how you'd felt and what you'd done about it. This was actually something that once we embedded in the year 5 classes, we actually brought to our staff briefings on a Monday. So for us, that was like the first thing I'd say to get this project whole school, to take this sounds like take it global, to take it whole school, was to introduce this to our staff, and it was really effective. And we modelled exactly what you do in the classroom in the briefing. So the impact of all those things. So firstly, I'll talk about the impact to the children in year 5, and then I'll talk about it as a whole school, what we did, and even now. So the cohort, the behaviour definitely calmed down. The children were able to take ownership of their emotions, and in the chapter of the book from us, you'll read about the children saying, it's raining outside, that's making me feel really anxious, I'm in the yellow zone, but don't worry because I'm doing this. Don't worry because I've done my mountain breathing and I'm going to be okay. And that's what we really want, isn't it? Like to be, people that are super children, people that are really self-aware and able to self-regulate. We found that we hugely benefited from the shared language, because as this was going bigger and bigger and getting whole school, the children were able to go to any adult and say, I'm feeling in the red zone, I'm feeling in the blue zone, and that everybody understood what that meant. So we've really got that shared language now, which aided the staff confidence, and good thing was that the data showed an improvement as well. Whole school. So what we did, after we saw the impact of year 5, we actually went to year 2, which was another a year group that we thought could really benefit from this. And once we saw the benefits in year 2, we went whole school. So here's a whole school display, you can see here. And here's another display in a classroom. So teachers have ownership. They can have names if they'd like. Some teachers have lolly sticks and bowls, different colour bowls. The children can move their names. Some teachers have a peg system. Others have the Velcro, which I would recommend because blue tack goes missing. Velcro is key. And then we introduced a timetabling difference. We added in the Monday morning meeting where that was the time. Because as teachers we know, time is of the essence. It's so precious, but giving that timetable time to teach strategies was so important. So that's what we've done the whole school. And even bigger than that, it actually has supported us in reinventing our new behaviour policy, because I think what we've learned from this is that as teachers, it goes back to the quote that Jean was saying, that we need to teach the strategies. We need to teach children to behave, and behaviour, we believe at Pinnerwood, is communication. And so that supports our redirect, rethink and reevaluate policy, and the zones of regulation are a tool to support us in bringing the children back to the green zone, getting them regulated again. Yes, that's that. And overall, what did we learn? So the children, we learnt loads of things, but I've narrowed it down to 3. The children need to be taught how to self-regulate, and it's got to be a priority for your school. The teacher as the model is vital and such an effective tool. I think teachers need to show their vulnerability, they need to show that they're people, they need to model being regulated. And lastly, in terms of research, the importance of staying really focused on what you wanted to do. As I've said, we started quite small with we're going to teach about the zones. We built up the displays, we built in the Monday morning meetings, we built up the Friday feedback, and it grew and it grew with strategies and confidence. We didn't just go in all guns blazing, we went small and not trying to do too much, but keeping really focused on what you'd like to do. Thank you very much.
Okay, it's time for question time, and I'm going to introduce to you, so we obviously have the lovely Jean, the lovely Emily, and the lovely John Ivens down at the end of the panel there. We also have the wonderful Chris Bagley, education psychologist, interested in educational system change. If you haven't heard about his States of Mind project, please do look it up. And the wonderful Andi Silvain, head teacher here at School 360, where we're running the session this evening. And I wonder, Ellie, if there are any questions?
Not at the moment.
Room. Okay.
Not at the
Are there any questions in the room for our panel?
Emily, thank you so much for sharing your experience at school. It's really great to hear. And it's lovely to hear the learning. That's the thing that people always think. Like, what was the biggest challenge as we went through the project?
I think the biggest challenge was the ambiguity of the red zone, I would say, because it's a big feeling, but that's quite hard to explain. So what we've gone with, we've kind of changed it a bit, we've gone with that the red zone is angry. So that's just how we simplified, because we were finding it really difficult to explain that. It's a big feeling, and when you're excited and when you're angry, your body does a similar thing. Yeah, so to keep it simple, we just said red is anger, yellow is anxious, green is all good, and blue is sad.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I'll just build on that one. I know from the feedback from some of the teachers that one of the risks was children thinking you've got to be in the green zone. So a lot of the teachers really had to work with their house to say it's okay not to be okay. I'm not okay sometimes.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I thought that when you said about the importance of the teacher as the model as well, that so often as teachers we're not okay. And I guess this gives a frame as well to be able to talk about that in a really straightforward.
It's very liberating.
Yeah. Andi, do you want to say something about that as well?
Yeah, so we've been using zones of regulation for quite a while since we opened, and what I find really interesting is how open the teachers are about the zone that they're in. You know, I hear conversations saying, oh, I'm a bit in the blue zone today, you know, it's Monday morning, or oh, I feel a bit in the yellow zone, and the children will speak back about giving them advice, what they could do to feel better. I think one of the most exciting things about all of the work that we've been doing as well is hearing the children recognise the fact that, like you said, Jean, that the emotions are no bad emotions, it's just how they feel, and most importantly that emotion can change, that it doesn't last forever. So there's a year 2 child just this week that was saying, I need to think about how I'm going to get myself out of the blue zone. I'll try to get into the green zone. Maybe I'll do this. And just really having those conversations about, how they feel and how fluid it is really exciting.
Yeah, anything else to add, guys?
Yeah, I guess it's interesting and heartening to see more and more schools adopting these approaches. And I guess looking back through history and the way that schooling has developed, there's tended to be a sense that we should divorce feeling from thinking, that they're somehow separate. And they're absolutely not, are they? I mean, if you don't feel anything, you literally can't think. That's a sociopath. We don't want to train sociopaths into being. And generally speaking, many schools, I'm sure some of you will be aware of these schools, are tending to perceive education as being, the transmission of information without conceptualising anything as having a role around feelings. Whereas if you look at all the academic studies and think about your own life, if you don't actually feel about what you're thinking, you can't act. So this is really important, isn't it? If young people are able to acknowledge their feelings, they're going to think better both academically, socially and all other ways. So it just makes sense, doesn't it, to do this work? So that really struck me as you were all talking.
I think it's just the permission to allow people to talk and express feeling and to own it. And that sounds fantastic. It's lovely to hear about the teachers doing that too, because that's very brave. Actually, sometimes you can, and it's okay for people to be quiet at that point. Everybody doesn't have to confess, but it's to have the space where you can do that. It's great. It's great to hear that.
A question over here? Yes. Maggie.
Emily, first of all, thank you for your great input. That was really very interesting, and the journey you travelled was a great one. We just wonder, we always ask our projects if there are any unexpected outcomes or surprises. Were there any surprises for you on the journey?
That's an excellent question. I'm trying to think back now. Were there any surprises? I think the speed in which the children could do it, they could go, okay, I'm on board, like straight away. And we know children are very self-indulgent. They love to talk about themselves. So actually, I think it was maybe a worry of ours. Like, if we introduce this, it will take a long time to develop that trust where they can share. But actually, that's already there. There was a lot of trust already that the children put into you as a teacher. It's such an honour. It's such an honour, isn't it? What a lovely job. So I think that they got the zones really quickly, and I was like, right, okay, so we moved on quite fast. And we had, the way I did the project was I taught 4 lessons, 1 for each colour of the zones, and then we did a lot of consolidating. And we talked about how you can feel 2 colours at the same time. You could feel like greenish, bluish. I love they always say that, greenish, bluish. Or like, and then what we've learned now is that the children, without even being prompted, will tell you, oh, I'm feeling in the red zone because this happened to me this morning. And you're like, okay, yeah, that I'd probably be in the red zone as well, if that happened to you. So yeah, just like how adaptable the children are.
That's probably the best of surprises.
Yeah, lovely.
They travel the journey very quickly.
I think Emily's probably being a bit modest. You said the trust was already there and it isn't necessarily there. A lot of it would be down to the climate you'd already created. So I think you have to think where your starting point is, and to introduce work on social emotional learning if you're kind of nowhere in those basics of relationships and trust.
Yeah,
it
that's true.
It might not work. So you'd already done a huge amount. I hope you'll get to, at this time we've got exams not far away. We've got kids in secondary school about to do GCSEs, and we've got SATs coming up. I hope by then you'll explain that the red zone can be panic as well, because if kids, in an age when we're all so worried about the levels of anxiety in our children and young people, this stuff about regulating your feelings works for those kinds of feelings as well as for not thumping someone in the playground. That's very useful.
Okay, we have a question from our online.
Yeah, we've got Cypher in the chat on YouTube that says rules of regulation does not work for everyone. So what do you propose on those circumstances when every child is different and responds differently?
Can I hand over to the guys at the end of the table to kick us off with that one?
Yeah, do you want me to go first, John? Yeah, I guess not all young people are in a position where they're ready to think about feelings linguistically. That's one thing, isn't it? So a lot of young people, even teenagers, they don't have the language capacities to necessarily name feelings even by colour. So lots of young people I've worked with in the sort of youth justice system and kids in people referral units in the prison context that don't get to that point when until they're much older, and some of them never do. So obviously then you need a much more, in my experience, embodied approach. So those young people might need movement, they might need to express themselves through doing something or demonstrating how they're feeling through other mechanisms, which might be artistic, creative, or it might simply be through closely identifying with a member of staff and seeking that support by being in their presence or exiting the room. So, it's not always going to work, is it, in terms of figuring out how you work with young people to identify feelings verbally. So then you have to have lots of other strategies, which I'm sure the primary folk in here will be very aware of. But also strikes me that it's so important that young people feel like they belong. And it seems to be what you're doing here by inviting young people to express their feelings is you're moving closer to them and they're feeling seen and heard. And I don't think you have to rigidly stick to the zones, do you? You can help them to express their feelings in a way that is meaningful to them, and in doing so you'll learn about them and they'll learn about you, and then you'll move closer together. So I think it's very complicated, right? And it's got to be very much needs-based and individual case-based. But I would definitely suggest that there are very successful ways you can do it without language and without zones.
That's okay. I just was thinking about what Jean was saying at the beginning, which is about those children who have all sorts of background in trauma and attachment difficulties, and how actually creating, and it goes back to what you were just saying as well, about having a safe space, a place where you can feel, it probably precedes something as cognitive behavioural as the zones of regulation. There are some children who emotionally are in a very different place and just can't access that. But in observing and creating an atmosphere where actually it's safe, I know that however I feel, I will always be looked after, is a beginning phase before you can always have success, or great success with those kind of approaches. So I completely understand if somebody is saying, well, it didn't work, it can't work. Absolutely right, it's part of something. But actually making children, creating an atmosphere where children don't feel threatened, however they feel, it's got to be baseline. This would be one of the first things you do.
And on rules and regulations, Andi, do you want to talk about rules and regulations at School 360 and how they work?
Yeah. So we do a lot of teaching through the values. In fact, we explicitly teach each of the values and what that looks like and how that will show up. And if there have been occasions where children have expressed themselves in a way that's inappropriate in the classroom, etc., or with another student, then when they're ready to have the conversation, they will also reflect on how they were feeling at the time when the incident would have happened, and they start to identify the pattern of, how they feel and how that precedes the incident that takes place. And we do, so a lot of what we do is to try and preempt or get the children to recognise when they're feeling that way, when things might go a bit wrong before it actually happens. And it's so interesting because we can see that in year 2, that children start to ask for what they need. So we will see it as the teacher and think, I can see that this child is a bit dysregulated, and so quite often they'll ask us ahead of time for what they need before it spirals. Oh my goodness, it's working.
So you're giving them permission to be themselves.
Yes.
Aren't you? And by doing that, you're inviting them to express themselves in a way that is meaningful to them and henceforth to you as well. It sounds really powerful.
It's so easy for this kind of work to get a bad name. It's like kind of letting your feelings hang out. And there's a great British thing, I think, about not wanting to show our emotions. And I think I'd just like to stress that this work isn't like that. It is really it's teaching, and it's quite carefully planned and managed like any other kind of teaching. And it isn't about adults just spilling out their woes onto the children. But there's a fear in sort of policy making circles that the Daily Mail will get hold of this and say schools are teaching our children to do goodness knows what. And the other thing I want to say is about this potential to create supportive communities in classes, because I think even if there are children in response to that person's excellent question, if there are children who can't at the moment get this, and the rest of the class understand it and get it, the rest of the class will kind of notice. And I've seen children say, I think go to the teacher and say, I think he's about to get in the red zone. Instead of blaming each other for their behaviour, children can be amazingly understanding of other children's stress and difficulties.
Thank you. We have another question.
Yeah, we have a question from Freya, who's asked, when you have applied this approach and the children are emotionally aware and they feel safe, what are the implications for transitions into different spaces? So home, childcare, new class, new school.
Very good question.
Playground too.
Yeah. So we, as part of the project, we did a lot of parent workshops. That was key, and we wanted that communication between home and school. So a lot of our families are now using the zones at home, which is really good, and that like word travels. So, and it's a very popular technique to use and strategy. So I know that the local beavers, rainbows, they're using the zones as well. I hear. So I think it's just about the local community and getting it out there. But that first home school link is so important. That's what I would say. Yeah.
Just building on that, so Freya said, I've found that transitions out of safe classrooms and relationships with one teacher are particularly tricky for SEND and LAC children.
Then it can be used as a tool, can't it, to identify the things that child feels and then problem solve what people can try and put in place. And if that doesn't work, then it's not the child's fault. It's then finding a different way of doing it. And perhaps there is in the transitions, I think the question was about, between primary and secondary, or between play spaces and classroom spaces. It's a tool that can then become a tool for objectifying how you're feeling, looking at outside yourself, and then thinking about, well, what do we do about that? How can we change that? It's really helpful.
The other answer to that is a bit political, but it is why we need a national approach to this, really, so that children leave the primary schools and go to a secondary school where other people will still be working on social emotional learning, and where there is a progression. In the book, we put a progression of the I can statements. I can do this, I can do that, right up from nursery to year 6, and there's one for secondary available too. That's what in the end we need. We do it for every other subject of the curriculum. We don't have children moving to secondary school and someone saying, oh, well, sometimes we do, but we don't do that here. We do literacy, we do maths, so why not social emotional learning? But then I do have a perspective on that.
Thank you. We had a question at the back there.
Yeah, Andi, you mentioned earlier that teachers are on board with this, and it occurred to me that you've developed an ethos, presumably here, which is both unthreatening and supportive. Otherwise, teachers wouldn't be so keen to express their feelings about what's going on. How have you managed to do that?
So thank you. Every time we meet, we have staff meetings, etc. We always begin with connecting. So just doing a check-in with each other, and no matter if we've got a short amount of time for a meeting, then the check-in will be short, but it doesn't mean that we don't have it at all. So it's that drip effect over a long period of time of just feeling safe with each other and knowing that we can be honest about how we're feeling, and that's okay. They experience that with us, and what I'm seeing is that they, feel comfortable to do that in their classrooms.
And do you do the same as yourself?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So you're setting the example.
Yeah.
Role modelling.
Can I build on that question? Because I think when you were talking, you were talking about the adults joining in this. And I suppose there's a question about, in order for the adults to be, I mean, a lot of the problems it sees is when adults are dysregulated and therefore they escalate or don't preempt situations, which is when things escalate for young people. So do the adults need to be regulated? Do you need to focus on the adults' well-being first before you focus on the children's well-being? Or can the focusing on the students' well-being be all passport into supporting the adults? It's a slightly provocative question, but I mean, obviously, so you want to do all of it, but can a dysregulated adult help a child to regulate themselves?
I'm going to start with Chris and John, who've both worked in places which are probably quite stressful for adults, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess short answer is not very well. If you're an extremely dysregulated adult and you're walking into a room with various types of baggage, which might be from your home life, which might be from your history, which might be the young person who presents to you in a way that triggers certain things going on for you, you've got to have a very safe, trusting and open dialogue with the senior leadership team, haven't you, in the school to actually make this work, to make these kind of approaches work. So I've certainly seen schools that are doing what you guys are doing, where you've got safe spaces for adults, for example, opportunities to have like supervisions with professionals like myself, like an EP, if you're really struggling, and those are regularly diaried, so people can come and do that. But then the most important thing that seems to have worked in schools doing this is regular, ongoing and timetabled space to sit down and think about how everyone is feeling in a very open, non-judgmental, transparent way. So you guys are modelling some brilliant practice there, very psychologically healthy practice. And I think if you don't do that, we've all been in schools, and I certainly have, where teachers are kind of at their end of their tether as soon as they walk into a classroom, and it's not really possible for them to use zones of regulation, even if that's a school policy. So I think we have to be realistic and go, we are human beings and we are impacted by our environments and our histories, and if we're not honest with each other about those, it's very difficult for us to teach successfully, I would say.
So yes.
Yes, very long-winded yay.
And I would just add at this point, gorgeous to see John Ivens. When I was the first head teacher, which is 19 years ago, John and I were in a shared supervision group, weren't we, as new head teachers in Southwark, and that was probably one of the things that was most influential, well, hugely influential in my career, of having that safe space as a new leader to do that. But I think it's quite unusual. I know it was with you, which was just unbelievable. But that when we think about the leaders as well, and how where are the safe spaces for leaders to do that work and have that support, that doesn't feel like it's that common, I suppose, is my observation.
I think it's incredibly rare and possibly rarer now. I think it's very hard to overestimate just how isolated head teachers are, and they have to self-manage everything, as well as manage the school and manage the governors and manage Ofsted and all of those things, and it's incredibly isolating. Going back to also thinking about teachers and whether people need to be superhuman, and I don't think you're suggesting that, but we all have off days, we all find things difficult. And I think when I started teaching, I was an absolute wreck. I felt completely inadequate, and in those days it was just one teacher in the class of 30 in a secondary school, and I felt that everybody was wonderful except for me, and I used to go home privately and just absolutely forcibly pushed out the front door in the morning. So I don't think people have to be absolutely wonderful, but I think the head teacher sets the tone and models down with the senior leadership team, but who looks after the head teacher is a different question. And that's a huge gap, because you have to hold it in. And we've all been in schools where the head teacher models something which is not quite so therapeutic and not quite so contained, and which things leak out, and you can see it spread everywhere. As an EP, I used to walk into a school and I could tell what the atmosphere was in the school when I walked to the reception window. It's the first thing, and in some schools nobody would look up and they would look down and they'd be tapping away, and you just knew from then onwards, this is okay, this person is experiencing. So coming back to your question, I think it is absolutely important to be human underneath the professional relationships in a school, and to allow people to have off days and crises and manage and support them through that. And I think you can, if you have that atmosphere, even if you're feeling a bit rubbish manage some huge emotional situations, as long as you know that people have got your back.
Jean?
Just building on that, I also was an educational psychologist once going into schools, and I called it the staff room mug test. The schools where everybody had their own labelled mug and nobody must touch that mug because it's mine. I knew that might be a bit tricky for the children. Sorry if you do that. That's how educational psychologists assess. But also, more seriously, I completely agree that if the adults are totally dysregulated, it's really, really hard to support the children. But there's nevertheless, at the cognitive level, there is a whole lot of things we do in social emotional learning that we might teach children that we think, oh, I can use that. You know, I don't know whether you ever found this, Emily, but you know,
yes, every day. Every day.
Yeah, and just learning in that, rather for some people to learn about it in that neutral space of this is something I'm going to do with the children, not about me, but actually, not that wouldn't be you, but some people might just need that bit of distance from working on emotions, and they can learn. I learned so much from just that one thing where, you know, I learned that all feelings are okay, it's what you do with them that's not necessarily, just little things you learn. I think, oh, no, that's really true, that helps me.
We have one more question online.
Yeah, we've got an ask for some advice for those in a secondary context, which is kind of when a student really kind of needs to regulate, how long should they be let out of class, and what should that look like?
As long as they need, and then think about what that question suggests, which is about the person's anxiety about how long they need. And that's the bit about managing the emotions, which is really hard, is because it makes you feel like rubbish if this child is distressed and can't contain their emotions, and it feels like you can't contain that for them. And so to many, short answer to that was as long as they need, if they're really dysregulated. And sometimes that means staying quite late. But actually, yeah.
Chris, did you want to add anything?
I just think that word often is used in schools, particularly secondary schools, isn't it? They are dysregulated. And there tends to be a formulaic response to that, which will be you are allowed 10 minutes doing X. If you have a timeout card, you can do Y, or that's unacceptable. And that's obviously very problematic because you're not getting to the bottom of why that young person is presenting the way they do. And it's not an easy thing for secondary schools to do, of course, but if you don't take the time to really deeply and authentically move towards that young person and find out what that means to them, and that might take some time. It might take interacting with family, it might take interacting with other members of staff to try and figure out what that behaviour is indicating. If you don't do that, it seems likely that the cycle will just continue endlessly, and the young person will always be perceived as the dysregulated, naughty, oppositional kid. So I guess what I would add to John's thing is there's no shortcuts really to figuring out what to do, and you've got to start with the young person really, rather than a rule or a boundary or a punitive measure, shall we say, however you want to phrase it.
Una?
Yeah, I was just thinking, it reminded me that the children in the cohort we worked with were year 4 then, they're now year 6. And I know you've touched on secondary schools, but they're off in September to new schools. Do any of you know, it might not necessarily be zones, but what are secondary schools using so that this doesn't just, because the children have had, it started with just one year group, but now the whole school does zones. And I'm just wondering how those children will manage in year 7. Do we know? I'm not not specific schools, but generally in secondary.
Yeah, well, first for you, I think it's really worth you working with your current year 6s and helping them understand that they own these tools. These are not, they are now grown up enough to use them themselves without the scaffolding of putting your Velcro name on anything. So it's something about them taking ownership and perhaps they could teach it. They could start to teach the year 3s about these things, something to make them own it. But there are a number of secondary schools. There's a lot of secondary schools that do zones within the SEND department and do it for children with autism. There are I don't personally know one that uses something like this right across the school, but I do know many schools that have some kind of Zen zone, a calming zone, and often on this question of time they might put in not a tight rule, you've got to go back after so long, but nevertheless a parameter. So one I know, they have a timer. The young people come in when they go to the Zen zone to regulate. They set it themselves a 20-minute timer. They then choose. They can either talk to an adult, there's always an adult there, they can choose that, or they can choose not to do that, and they could do some doodling or play with kinetic sand or sit in the rocking chair, but it's their choice what they do. And when the timer goes off, again, it's their choice. They're ready or they're not ready. And the schools say, on the whole, most of them say, right, I'm ready now, I can go back. And some need to stay longer. But I think having a bit of a parameter can be helpful. Structure and routine do help children, but within that you need the flexibility to go further.
Anyone else? Okay, one more question.
Thanks, Sarah. I think John has talked about the roller coaster, really, of the mental health of head teachers. And I remember talking with a colleague of mine about 20 years ago about the duty of care of head teachers, who have the duty of care of just about everybody in the school. Our question was always to head teachers, who has the duty of care for you? The answer was nothing, really. It was very difficult for people to come up with an answer. Some people said, chair of governors, maybe, or a mentor head teacher in another school. But it was a quite tricky thing. I'm just wondering, who has the duty of care for you two?
Okay, so I mean, we are head teachers. We both have our own coach who we work with as and when we need it, for as long as we need it or as short as we need it. Someone who is outside the organisation but has that experience of what it is like to be a leader and to carry that weight that you carry and to be absorbing all of the kind of emotions of other people in the school. And I think that's really important. I mean, we obviously have each other as co-head teachers, but even that's not enough, really. You need to have someone outside who you can talk to and debrief with and download some of those emotions that you're feeling when you've had a difficult day or a difficult month.
Yeah, and just like that, prevention is better than cure. So you might think, I don't need to see my coach this week or this month because everything's going really well, everything's working really well. But that is also the time to make sure it stays a priority, and that we're not waiting for a crisis or when things are too overwhelming. No, I need to book an appointment now. Just prioritising that.
Yeah, because what I'm thinking is the whole thing of role modelling. For you to role model, know what it's like to your staff, but also role model for the kids in their care. Yeah, it's that kind of cascade.
Absolutely.
And we're quite open about it. I'll have a big sign on the door. Do not coaching in progress or so session taking place now. And that's quite deliberate, so that I'm not just in a meeting. People are aware of the type of meeting that it is.
Chris, do you want to
it's really interesting having worked with a lot of different head teachers, how different head teachers are, like we all are. And it really strikes me that some heads, they don't want to do the talking. They don't want to do a talking approach like a coaching session or a supervision session, and they just want to go and play football. And I was just very aware as I became a psychologist and went through over a few years that you've got to be very responsive and flexible to head teachers as well, because some of them actually find that stressful and actually makes them feel more heightened, and they just want to go and hang out with their mates and have a pint or go and have a curry. So I really learned from trying to press head teachers a bit when I could see they were stressed. Should we have a one-to-one? And it was quite obvious to me, some of them were like, no mate, I couldn't talk about this anymore. There was enough talking, I was like, go and relax. So that's quite interesting, but I know that in big education they use coaching a lot. So obviously it's working with these guys, but yeah, it's very varied, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
It's also interesting. I was waiting for them to say, and our amazing line manager, Liz. So legally, they may not feel it clearly, but legally, I have a duty of care as the CEO of the trust. So it's interesting how MAT structures have kind of added or not added. So, some MAT structures hopefully are reasonably supportive and create a culture of, openness and coaching and emphasis on coaching. I have coaching too and always have had. And some MAT structures are not contributing to a culture of psychological safety for their head teachers, right? And I dare say they're not in this room because probably wouldn't be here. So, but it's interesting when you think about head teachers, like the role that half the schools in the country are in maths, or academies, half aren't, and that experience I think varies quite wildly, which is kind of an interesting, potentially positive role, I think, for the role that the positives of multi-academy trust can provide and it's not just about me, it's also about the colleague head teachers within the trust having that horizontal peer support, being at the end of a phone and all of that stuff. So I think there is opportunity for that kind of social network for not just heads as well, but leaders within a trust when that's working positively.
Thank you, great. Go on, John.
I was hearing your note on the door, and I was thinking how being unavailable as a head teacher is quite an extraordinary statement to say to other people. The lack of availability almost feels like a transgression that you, yes, really, really hard. Mummy's not available. it's really hard.
Thank you. So I'm going to draw us to a close just to say, please buy the book, discount now available. And just some thank yous. Obviously, a huge thank you to all of our panel for speaking this evening, especially Jean, who brought the book to fruition. I think without Jean, we wouldn't be having this book launch this evening. A big thank you to Sarah and Anisha and Stephen, who have helped run and live stream us tonight, and to the Routledge team, the Laurel Trust and the Edge Foundation, who've made the project and this event tonight possible. So thank you so much. I'm going to draw us to a close. Just one more thing to say. If you like this event and you'd like to know about more events like this, we have a newsletter. We issue lots of useful information. If you are interested in projects like this, please do use the QR code and sign up. Wonderful thanks to all our online listeners this evening and to our audience here in the room. Can we give our panel a huge clap? Thank you so much, and goodbye to everyone who's online. Thank you.